so I'm raising $3 million, not $8 million, $3 million for my startup company, Safen. And that money will take us through manufacturing and hiring clinical specialists. And I hope marketing, because marketing is going to be a huge factor in my whole play. So that's what I'm doing. And I'm talking with individuals and individuals, family offices, and potentially some funds I'm in San Antonio, Texas, but I spend a lot of time in Austin, Texas, and there are a couple of funds in Austin that are interested in supporting women founders. And I didn't really understand that being a woman founder had its own, took on its own life. And I'm just now learning that.
Well, that's a pretty good introduction for today's talk. Why don't I ask, and I don't typically do this, but we don't typically have two guests that we've never met before. So Amy and Pam, would you share with us your backgrounds?
Sure, Amy, why don't you go ahead?
Wonderful. Yeah, I'm grateful to be here. We've connected, Joe, on LinkedIn for many, many years, all the way back to my beginnings in medical device. So happy to be a part of this. I've been in healthcare for 10 plus years now in medical device. I ran a genetics laboratory in biotech, and very passionate about the healthcare space. I then left traditional healthcare after moving from biotech to more of a consumer-driven healthcare environment and some healthcare tech startups. And I left them and went and started my own CBD company about 4.5 years ago and bootstrapped that. And it's been doing very well. We just got access to Marriott hotels. So very grateful for that. And now
landed what hotels?
The Marriott hotels.
Really?
Yeah.
And what will they be purchasing from you?
So we have skincare and ingestibles. So we launched skincare in 2020, and we actually have CBD facials and massages. So they use the products in the spa and then in the mini bar.
I'm completely unfamiliar with CBD infused lotions, but maybe you'll teach me about that later.
I will. I'll send you some. We'll see your skin transform over these meetings every week.
Okay. I don't know whether that's good or bad, but I'm going to assume good with the tone that you presented it.
Yeah, and now I actually went through a phase of grief in my life and depression. I lost my husband in 2019 to glioblastoma, brain cancer, after a number of years of fighting that. And so I went into depression and grief, and CBD helped me, but also psychedelics helped me. And so I am now raising $3 million, and I am with a partner of mine, so not bootstrapping this one, which I'm very excited for. I am launching a telemedicine company and focusing on psychedelics as the catalyst for healing trauma. And then we are building out a virtual reality platform for group therapy, where people can show up anonymously in group therapy and continue to work on moving past their healing and are moving past their trauma, I should say, and move into a better state of healing and a more well-rounded and healthy life.
Okay, and I just was looking while you spoke. When we connected, you were at CarePoint.
CarePoint, yeah. So that was the healthcare IT company, Healthcare Rewards. And I launched the sales team for them. It's always been a blend of, health and wellness, healthcare, and I have a minor in chemistry, so I very much understand the science side of things. And then I've been in sales and marketing and startup for my whole career. And so the chaos and the calm, I love them both.
Okay. Pamela, if you would give us your background a little bit.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Pam York. I'm here by way of Alyssa. And I am currently a VC. I launched my own venture capital group in 2018. We're fully invested in Fund 1, and we're now raising Fund 2. We only invest in early stage health-related startups, healthcare-related startups led by women. And so I also am an entrepreneur and a co-founder. I launched 2 VC-backed companies a number of years ago. Both of those companies had exits, and I've been in technology commercialization my whole career. So that's kind of our specialty, is the very, very early stage startup investing, where there's not much that's been proven out, and that's really what's there for the company to do. So high risk, high return, and didn't really plan on focusing on women. I have a PhD in electrical engineering, and most of my career I really worked with in very male-oriented environments, and that was just, that's what I did. And it was only when I started getting into venture capital, when I started to understand the differences there, and decided to focus on that. And in parallel with that, done a lot of what I call awareness-based transformational leadership development, which is really designed, it's all for the purposes of helping people produce better, faster results. So that's me.
We aren't yet connected, but we will be momentarily when you go to LinkedIn. And I'm struck by your profile, which has no fewer than 7 date to present. So you're present.
Is that a problem?
3, it says Collider, Empower You Education, Techstars, a mentor for Techstars for Revolution, an investment advisor for the University of Minnesota, and the founder and CEO of Atasi Ventures.
Yeah, Atasi is just my personal investment vehicle for my personal investments. Capita 3 is our venture capital group. And and you can add to that Matter. I'm now a venture fellow for Matter, if you're familiar with that, in Chicago. So I do feel
Tell us about your sleep hygiene.
It's not a lot. I'm learning to go without a lot of sleep.
Yeah,
but,
sounds that way. It sounds imperative.
Yeah, this is an imperative for me.
Alyssa, today's conversation was your brainchild. Tell us about your challenge and why you felt this was a rich topic for us to explore.
Well, I think Andrea as well, like she helped facilitate this, and she connected Maren, and she was the one that said Maren needs to be here too. And so I'm currently raising capital. I've noticed as being what it seems like the first female selling hardware, designing and founding the company and going into commercialization in the orthopedic space and the spine space. I mean, it's literally all men that I'm speaking to. And so when I was in Pam's course, the biogenerator said, hey, you might be interested in this. We think that you would be a good fit for Pam and Barb's course through Capita 3. And so she presented an HBR article about how 2% of medtech funding is provided to women. And I was like, wow, I knew it was going to be low, but I didn't realize it was going to be that extraordinarily low. But what I really liked about the article was how it reframed how to solve it. And it wasn't just complaining, it was saying, hey, here's an idea. This is how we can solve it. This is how we can fix it. And that's why I was like, we've got to make more awareness here, because we're going to see a lot more women founders. And if everybody universally can agree that these are certain questions that we'll ask no matter what gender is in front of us, then we create a universal structure for capital raising. And so, yeah.
Andrea or Maren, anything you'd like to add before we kind of start whatever they have as a prepared presentation?
Not much. I'm looking forward to your insights, both Maren and Pamela and Amy. And I was struck by the 2% as well, and it does reflect what I see when through my clients and the people who are leading the companies that I work with. And so it's exciting to see, like Alyssa, like you said, something practical, something that we can advice that can be implemented and people can learn to address the bias that we all have when it comes to gender in startups and medtech.
Thanks. And Maren, anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that in the Seattle area, we've had some extremely capable women entrepreneurs who have done a tremendous job in fundraising. But I also have been involved in multiple screening situations, and the questions asked of women entrepreneurs is generally different than those asked of men. And there is a little bit of a different bias. So
I'm
Looking
really
forward
interested
to
in what those different
digging
questions
into
are,
this
but
topic.
perhaps that'll come up. And lastly, Pamela, I see that you are a TED talker, and your topic was use fear as your guide. Is it related to what you'll share today?
Yes, it is. Absolutely. That's the core of what we're doing. And it's one of my great passions, as Alyssa knows, but it looks like it's a fairly intimate group. So I do not need to do a presentation unless people literally want to see the data.
As I shared, only if it helps illustrate and convey your story.
Yeah, let's not do that. And then Maren, if we feel like you've got the slides in front of you, if we feel like we
do.
want to throw up the data to show people, but otherwise let's just talk through it because it sounds like everyone's really quite present to the challenges. So should I just jump in, Joe, and maybe give a little bit of a
Have at it.
kind of a yeah.
We all have our coffee. Everyone have their coffee. Okay.
Pam,
I
I
left
might
my
wanna-
coffee in the car.
Okay.
There are people that are watching that don't know the data, so that aren't on the panel list. So whatever you feel is relevant.
Yeah, perhaps if you have some hard data you want to share, this is being recorded, and so we can use excerpts of that later on for folks to illustrate certain points. But please.
Yes, for
All right.
sure. I think I've pretty much given you a background on myself. And so the question is how did we get here? That's kind of the story that I want to share with you. And in 2014, 2015, myself and my partners and a number of other people were really working to build the Minneapolis startup ecosystem. And, we started noticing at these events, whether they were pitch events or educational events, there were almost no women attending, and there certainly weren't women pitching or women panelists. And so we started asking the question, what's going on here? And what we would hear from people, primarily male organizers, and I say that with all due respect to everyone, but what we would hear was, well, we don't see them. We don't have women in our network, and when we do, they're not very good. We kept hearing that over and over and over again. And then they threw it onto us to find women panelists and startups to present. And so that launched a lot of things like that happened. And that launched this question for me, what's really going on here? What's actually happening? This whole 2%, data wasn't even available back then. And so long story short, I decided to put my attention on researching what is actually happening here. What does the data say? And this is before PitchBook and Crunchbase were actually collecting the data. I think they had the data, but they hadn't reported on it, or they didn't know to report on it, right? And so we hired an intern to literally go through every Series A financing in the US in 2015, I think it was, and then go to the websites of the companies and look to see was there a woman CEO. And that's when we started seeing holy crap, there's not very many women getting financed. Fast forward to present, the data now shows that, 2% of all venture capital financing goes to women CEOs. That does not, so we put aside male, female founding teams, those numbers are higher. But when it's a woman CEO, it's about 2%. When it's a Black woman CEO, it's about 0.4% of all venture capital financing in the US, not just medtech. And those numbers haven't changed in 10 years.
Let me ask
So,
to make kind of an apples comparison. I'll state in a way that I know is wrong. Let's say only 2%, as a population, happen to be women presenting and asking for capital. So they are getting 100% of the time. Clearly not the case. So I don't imagine it's 50-50, is it?
yeah, it's actually a little difficult to get that data because it's reported as male and female founding teams versus male only. They haven't really focused on just, female-led teams or female CEOs, but I would say it's probably about 20-25% of the companies being launched are led by just women. And when we were doing this research, we saw that 4 times more women were launching companies than their male counterparts during that time. And since then, we see probably 1,000 companies a year, and a vast majority of them are women. So it's not like there aren't a bunch of women-led companies out there, but we understand that people might have thought that, and certainly there are more male-led companies than women, but there's a huge disparity. If 20% are led by women and 2% are getting financing, you can
Right.
see.
I didn't have that perspective. So yeah.
Yeah. And then, so that's kind of some of the data. And then Maren, if you can find the slide and put up the slide that shows women are exceptional performers, I think this would be really interesting for people to see this.
I was just looking at that one. So, yep.
Yeah. So to your point, Joe, it's not like there aren't a lot of women forming companies, and it's not like if they are, they're not great performers. So there's been a lot of data that's been collected over a long period of time showing that women actually, on average, outperform the male-only companies in all of the critical categories that, you know, a startup company or that a venture capitalist would want to see.
What does
So,
performed better at Series A mean?
Means so Series A is a round of financing,
Yes.
right? And it
Performed
means
better
they have
meaning raised more?
higher valuations.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, I don't know how that would be measured, but I take it as a good thing.
By the actual valuation of the company at the financing round. It's a specific number identified in the deal documents. So that's how it's known. But in any case, it's so we know there's plenty of startups led by women. We know they are performing well. If you've ever heard Kevin O'Leary, I think that's his name, from Shark Tank, he's very vocal about the fact that the women in his portfolio are the best performers, and he tends to emphasize women. And this is, of course, in the context of there's tons of great male performers, tons of great female performers. It's really about why are women not receiving a commensurate amount of capital.
How would you
Make
answer
sense?
that succinctly? Yes. What would you say is the thing? Why?
Well, I think there's a couple of things, and these are outlined in the presentation, but just at the highest level, Alyssa mentioned that VCs really query women differently than men. And this was a study that was done by, I think it was MIT. They observed hundreds of conversations between VCs and entrepreneurs, and then they analyzed that data.
Yeah, I'm
And
fascinated.
VCs, isn't that interesting?
I'm fascinated to hear what these different questions are. And I hope
Well,
I'm not going to cringe.
It probably won't surprise you, actually. Yeah, I don't know if you guys can see all of that, but the little bullet points there kind of tell the story. So venture capitalists tend to ask women what are called prevention questions, meaning, okay, here's the significant risk you're facing. How are you going to mitigate that risk? And they tend to ask men promotional questions like, oh, great. So once you receive this financing, what is your strategy for scaling the company? So two very different mindsets. And the shocking thing, which is shown in the data, is that for every prevention question asked, entrepreneurs on average raised $4 million less in financing. So this is not a trivial, situation. And like Alyssa said, there's some remedies to this. One of them is having more women be investors, because part of it's that women are doing things, if they're doing things in women's health or children's health, or it could be areas that men simply don't relate to or don't understand. But we actually know that that's only a fraction of the problem. It's really more that women are perceived as a higher risk. That's my assertion. I think the data pretty much bears that out, especially in 2021 and 2020 and 2021. The percentage of 2% actually dropped to 1% because, and no one knows exactly why, but I think generally we think it's because women are perceived as a higher risk investment.
Let me interject and ask any of the ladies that helped put this morning together. Do you share that view that women are perceived as a higher risk, and why?
I think that, yeah, I do. I think that the evidence that I've seen in the screening committees is the questions to women are more, well, what if this happens, and what if this happens, and what if this happens? And they're looking for a reason not to invest, as opposed to the questions that often get asked of male entrepreneurs, which are more, well, what's your next step? What are your next products? Where do you see this thing going? So that pattern that I've seen is very similar to this. I don't know that it's a conscious thing. I think if you asked an entrepreneur or you asked an investor, do you see women as higher risk? They would probably say no. So I think a lot of it's just actually subconscious in terms of how our culture looks at women in terms of whether or not they're aggressive enough, whether they are willing to take hard stands. And so there's a lot of the gender bias, I think, that's built into that as well. But this is very similar to the pattern of questioning I've
Now,
seen.
Elizabeth, you've raised money, and Amy, you have, and Alyssa, you are trying to now, and Pamela, I assumed you have as well. Do you feel, as you reflect on conversations that you've had with potential investors, that, you know, come to think of it, they did ask me a lot of what if prevention questions?
In my case, no question about it.
There's no question that they ask you, well, what
question.
if this and what if that?
No question. And when I raised my initial money from my angel investor, who happens to be a woman, I had been with a CFO was with me, and we were pitching and presenting, and eventually I was told by the potential investors, who were all men in that case, they told the person who introduced me to them, they said to tell Elizabeth she needs to get rid of the CFO, she needs to present herself, and essentially to stop, for me to tell the story. So I did. And then I took a sales course. And 1 month after I took my sales course, I found my angel investor myself. She happens to be a woman. And so that was my experience. I'm now having a different experience. But again, reaching out to firms and groups who are interested in investing in women founders.
I have two questions. One is, so am I to understand that part of the problem was your old CFO that you advised to sideline was a poor presenter?
I think so.
He wasn't.
I think that was the case, and I didn't know that. I was brand new to this, and I very much I had to learn. So I think I'm an anomaly, and that I wasn't in the corporate world for the previous 25 years, like most other people who are my age have been in the corporate world, and I wasn't. So it was very much a male, female, very much asking me, well, what about, what the whole prevention piece? I mean, what did I do in my previous career? I was the head of my household with 4 kids who went to college with no debt. That's not important. However, I learned that it was important to tell that piece of the story.
I'm still thinking that if the CFO wasn't an effective presenter, that's not gender-based.
No, it wasn't gender-based, but I'm the founder, and I would defer to him. So it was very much, I'm learning now, but it was very much a male-female role. He happened to be a poor presenter. I now have a new person with me who is a man who is a very good presenter. So that was my evolution. But
okay, and you say that you're finding different challenges now. What's the difference in this round of fundraising that is new somehow? Did I understand properly?
It's really still the prevention questions. Well, it's still the very questions that Pam is mentioning. I'm experiencing that.
Sanjeev, you wanted to contribute?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I've actually seen that women tend to question women even more than men do. A lot of times when I've gone in the past with my team, and I had women in my team, and we'd go and present, and they'd start asking questions, which wouldn't be asked of me or others, and it just didn't make sense. So, and then since I've been working in women's health, there's a lot more questions asked about that, and people shy away, as opposed to if we were working in men's health. It's just, so I agree with you guys that there is a gender bias.
I'm willing to look stupid on these calls, ladies. So let me ask what I think is stereotypical and just may show my ignorance. I'm under the impression that in general, women are more risk averse than men. I mean, is that not true? I'm thinking that risk aversion means more probing. What about this? And you could, this kind of thing. Am I off on this? I don't know if there's any study on that.
I think that boils down to, obviously everybody on this call is not, so for the most part, but it all depends on your position in life, because there's so much more higher likelihood of women being stay-at-home moms, and that it gives you a very vulnerable sense that if you lost your husband, who's a sole breadwinner, for overnight, there's a lot of worry and concern there. Going back to the perspective of of why these questions are asked, I think between women and men, different things are have different levels of importance. So that's why there always should be a woman on any team. And there should always be different perspectives, not just women, but also different cultures and different backgrounds, because there's so many different angles and so many different blinders that are put on. And women, the reason why I think that women are so hard on each other is because they know that there's usually only one seat. When there's 20 seats at the table, only one of those seats are probably going to be filled with a woman. And so women are trained to be competitive with each other because they're vying for that one spot, if that makes sense. Did that translate properly?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, Alyssa. I just watched Theranos. I guess it wasn't a documentary, it was more of a mini series. And that was the point they were making, that because Elizabeth Holmes failed, that will reflect poorly on an entire demographic of female founders. And she is basically, casted as the shadow that will last for many years.
And
Well,
she was
Alyssa,
led by an all-men team. Her
You
team
said
was
that among
all
the first
men.
times we met, you said, I'm not aware of any other woman founder for hardware, and that I'm going to be looked at more harshly. It seems like it's that same sentiment. Amy, I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, so early in the raise process years back when I was looking at raising for Moellons, it wasn't really within my awareness to realize that the questions were in these two categories of prevention and promotion. But looking back, 100%, I was, it's funny because coming from a sales background, I very much went into it in a promotion mindset. Where am I going to take this company? And yes, what are the obstacles, but what is the model for success? And upon entering various meetings with men, it was more so vetting me on what I was going to do with all of these challenges and all of these things that were going to hold me back. And did I check this box? And what will I do in this scenario? And, I found the meeting almost like, pulling me backwards from this, excitement and forward trajectory. So now knowing that, I, of course, take this prevention, kind of questioning and shift it as early in the meeting as possible. And I've kind of gone through in my head and thought about why this happens. And perhaps, I think about it within the dynamic of men sitting with other men. And that is what is the norm. It's a man's world in that way a lot of the time. And so the camaraderie and the excitement and strategy is shared very easily in the conversation from a man to a man. But perhaps the reason why when a woman is sitting at the table and it's in a much more rare for that to happen, that's just where their mind goes in order to figure out whether this person is going to generate the most return for them. Can you handle these things that perhaps they intuitively sense that within a man, that he has that mindset or personality or drive to be able to overcome some of the things that he really has to thoroughly question in a woman. And I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing. I just think that, it's a unique situation, and the better we get at sitting at the table and aligning ourselves in whatever way we have to do that, the easier it's going to become, and the more that prevention and promotion, are seen as synonymous, if they ever will be.
Pamela, I'd like to ask you, if our call were to end now, my primary, if not frankly sole takeaway is women get asked different questions, more preventative, and it costs $4 million in an average raise every time that happens, or something like that. Is there more? Or is that that's 90% of the problem? Or is that a third of the problem?
I would say that's a consequence of the problem. And this is a pretty complex conversation. We could point to a lot of factors at play here, but we Capita 3, how we now think of this, and I think our data and the research that we've done bears this out, that the thing to do is to look at this at the level of consciousness. What are the thought patterns that are conditioned into us that we carry consciously or unconsciously and operate in the world from? And understanding those. And, so some of the thought patterns are women are, as good as men in business, women are more risk averse. You can name a million different thought patterns, and some of them seem true, and some of them we could question. And so what we wanted to do was really get to the essence of how do we solve that problem?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you understand as a woman or as a Black person, every environment you enter, people are going to be operating from beliefs that are going to affect my ability to be successful. And I have to be aware of those, especially if they are eliciting in me a feeling of a lack of confidence or a fear or a feeling of being risk averse. And what I then can do is understand those fears, resolve them, and move into those conversations feeling very confident and compelling to navigate through whatever comes my way. So when someone says to me, Pam, there aren't enough women-led healthcare startups for you to actually build a venture capital legacy on.
Now, I brought up your team page here where you say you're capitalizing on next generation startup companies women are building. Does that mean that you've never funded a male-led company?
I personally have funded male-led companies, and we have
But not as
male
Capita
founders.
3.
Yeah, not as Capita 3. Yeah. Well, we have one company that's a husband-wife team.
Okay. And these are, I presume, some of the exits you've had?
These are
Everything.
companies from our fund one that we've invested in, and we have a much broader set of investments individually.
Okay.
I
I
don't.
think we should commend the guys that are on the call, because this is a tough conversation, and these are obviously not the men who are propagating this. So I do
Can I be
want to
honest?
give a shout out.
I'm disappointed. Thank you, gentlemen, but I'm disappointed by the relatively poor attendance by men today. I am.
Interesting is we're talking about funding, but this actually is very prevalent in quality systems. So I'm a very dominant personality, so you would think I could go into any room and command a presence and everybody would just believe me, but that's not true. I will say something.
I mean, I'm afraid of you personally.
Right. Well, please don't be afraid of me.
I'm
What I mean is I will go,
I'm
hey,
also afraid of you.
and I cite the standards and the regulations and I cite examples and I give the story, but then they'll be like, oh yeah, no, like the pat on the head. And it's like, of course, the redhead in me goes, okay, I'm gonna bite my tongue. The quietest guy in the room comes and says the exact same thing. That's a great idea. And it's a
So you're saying that your suggestions are dismissed as being too risk averse, too
no, that I'm too conservative.
yes, that's what I meant. Risk averse.
Actually, can I interject? I would say that there's a rejection in that conversation of what you're saying.
Yep.
It's not that what you're saying is not true. They're rejecting you as the person presenting that information. And when the man says it, there's a clear acknowledgement that that information is valid.
Yep.
I would say it's a credibility issue, right? When Nellie says it, it's not necessarily seen as credible. And if a man says it, the same thing. I have experienced that also.
Another way, as a man, another way to say that, Maren, is, a lot of the men haven't left the playground, right? And I do that here on the Healing Ranch as well. I coach a lot of men executives. I've been doing this for 30 years, and I'm always challenging them to leave. I say that as actually a narrative, leave the playground. I sit on the board of women, 100% women-owned fashion company, and they're both in the LGBTQ community, right? Play Out Apparel, and their feet as women, and then as LGBTQ, the challenges that we've been experiencing in fundraising is tremendous. And it's because the average, again, forgive me for the other men out there, but the average perspective, like men are, when they come in business, they get that whole brotherhood perspective, which actually regresses them emotionally to go back to the the basketball court, and they don't want the girl to come and play with them. And that's where it's very deep rooted, subconscious cultural behavior. And it takes consciousness, shift in consciousness to have them change that perspective. And I think it's 1 yard football in making those changes is one person at a time. And, but also men and I do with, I've been a spiritual healer and I've done my inner work, right? And I focused on that. But it takes that kind of heavy lifting and for men to support each other on that journey. My post this morning on TikTok was exactly that. It was like, guys, we work, I do fundraising, I'm in M&A work, I'm turning businesses around, investing, but almost every conversation before we start will be ending, we check in, and there are always personal stories, right? Sickness and children doing drugs and problems. But in business, we don't talk about that enough. And I'm just giving you a narrative to saying, I agree with what everybody's saying, but it's because men haven't left the playground. And I think we got to go back and help them do that.
Well, it's a combination. And I like the analogy of men not leaving the playground, but there's also a really important piece in terms of what Amy was talking about, what Alyssa was talking about earlier, in how women show up in the business. And I saw this, I'm an electrical engineer as well, and started in that area a long time ago. But what I would observe is, we'd be in a meeting and the new male engineer would say, oh, I don't know how to do that. And 3 of the old guys would jump on that and say, oh, here, let me show you how to do it. And if I said, well, I don't know how to do it, they would say, well, we'll give you something else to do. Right. So
I haven't left the playground. That's exactly that's the behavior on the playground.
Yeah. But in terms of what Amy is talking about, it's really hard to change that conversation. I've watched male entrepreneurs walk in and say, hey, I've never run a company before, but I'm open to feedback. Come and, talk to me. And the guys are like, yeah, I'm happy to be an advisor. I'll help you with it. And if a woman says the same thing, you see the credibility just drop. So there's even when men and women entrepreneurs share the same information, again, I saw this as an engineer too, the reaction and the support of the male community is to let's build you up. And the reaction to a woman is, well, then let's find something else for you to do rather than bringing you up. And I have found, at least for me, that kind of just stomping all over that and saying, hey, will somebody help me learn this and be proactive about stepping in and saying, I want to know this, will you teach me it, is somewhat effective at turning that situation around. But you do have to put yourself out there and ask for the help. It won't be offered as it is in other situations.
Yeah, I'd like to find
that's I'd like to ask maybe Pamela, because I know you had the presentation. I'd love to leave this conversation with a sense of what are the watch-outs? You talked about prevention versus promotion, but also what can we do? But what advice do you give? I mean, certainly as part of Capita 3 to women entrepreneurs that is gender specific, and how you find that these pieces of advice have translated into their success.
Yeah, definitely. So what we teach in our program is that we separate the external world from the internal world. What are you carrying into a conversation that could cause you to not produce the success that you want? And also, the world is the way it is. Paul, I love the work that you're doing, but it is the way it is, and being very cognizant of that and how you might react to it. A lot of women react to that with fear, which makes sense, right? If you're 5 to 10 times less likely to raise financing, that's going to provoke some anxiety, and that's going to come through in how you present. And if you look at, and this is true across the board, right? It's not just venture capital. If you look at what does it take to raise financing, confidence is the number one factor. It actually trumps experience.
What is the number one factor?
Confidence.
Yeah.
And if
that's interesting.
Confidence is the number one factor, closely followed by experience. And a lot of women are not carrying themselves with as much confidence because they keep getting this feedback that they're not as good. And so we teach women to discover those fears, problem solve through them, and then they can carry themselves with much greater confidence and be prepared to respond to the objections that are bound to come.
That's a great insight. I want more. Give me a second insight. One
of the most important things that we have people do, and this is, if you can understand understand how to be confident. You can do this. You can take a preventative question and very confidently answer that with a promotional answer. So the confidence leads to clarity on how to deal with any given situation, especially what we call negative objection analysis. You know, there's going to be objections as a woman. So get prepared to answer the hardest questions you know that you're going to get. That will increase your confidence and improve your results.
Now, you hinted at something there. I want to see if I understand. In your program, can you teach us to take what is actually a preventative question and answer it promotionally and kind of negate that dynamic?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so it's a two-part answer. One is that we go to the root cause for women and help them just automatically be more confident, because you can't anticipate every objection you're going to get, and you want to be able to in the
Well, over
moment.
time, you pretty much can. You do 100
You
of these
can.
things, you've heard 95% of the
Yes.
questions.
Yeah, and so live on your feet is awesome, but also preparation. We tell people
course.
to write out FAQs
Sure.
and
of course.
practice until you sound very confident.
Yeah. As a marketing strategist, I agree completely. Know your pitch, basically. What's the most succinct way I can convey a reason for you to believe what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Amy, would you like to add anything perhaps from your personal experience about, I mean, it seems to come back to this preventative, promotional competence. This is what I'm taking away, principally.
I definitely agree. I think another layer of this consciousness is our emotional capacity, and like Pamela said, what we carry into, or what is really behind our responses. And I feel that women tend to hold on to emotions a bit longer than men do. And, you know, I actually love riding horses. And one of the things about riding horses is that you cannot take your emotions onto the horse. The emotions that you have, or challenges that you have, the stresses that you have throughout the day, once you get on that horse, you need to let them go.
Well, you
because
need
that
to give her
horse
a free
gets
trip to the
stuck on
Zero
it.
Ranch. That's what
I
has to
know.
happen.
I know. I was thinking, Amy, we got to talk. I live on a ranch and I rescue wild horses.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I have 3. So yeah, I would
You
love
have 3 horses of your own?
I have 3, and I have a farm. And so yeah.
So they're on your property?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
All
So
right, who else
anyway,
has horses here? I got none. Okay, just the 2 of you.
But-
You also have horses, Elizabeth, on your property?
Well, actually, I have she's a retired quarter horse. I'm also a horse person, and I grew up riding horses, and I still ride. And there's no question that is
Therapeutic?
it's totally therapeutic. And there's no question that you have to let that go.
One of my
So when I
younger
go
son's
into my
first
pitch-
jobs was at a therapeutic equine center.
Wow.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
So,
it's gonna
and
be a
Amy, I would like to
behavioral trainer
touch
for
base.
canines.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I'd like to
Elizabeth.
touch base with you about grief. I had another experience about 15 years ago that I'm happy to share.
Yeah, I would love to.
I think that that's the beauty in the Capita 3 program, is working through that and Pam said, I use this quote all the time. She said, it's just wiring. We can all change and navigate how we're perceived and be more of our authentic self, because that's really what happens over time. We lose our authentic self. And that's a lot of times just because of various traumas that have occurred through our lives, and letting those go, processing them, and really definitively showing who you are as a human being, who you were put on this earth to be, by being your authentic self and delivering a message that gives you confidence, being 100% authentic. And that's what I really took from Pam's courses. Fantastic courses.
So may I ask, are you, Pam, are you funding Alyssa, or she's in your program? How does that work?
Alyssa came through our program.
Yeah, the Biogenerator of St. Louis sponsored me. They sent me an email one day. They said, Alyssa, we recognize that you have an opportunity here, and we think that we would like to give you a scholarship to attend these Capita 3 courses. And so I was like, okay.
Tell me about that experience for those who perhaps listen later and are interested. What what was the program and what does it typically cost for someone, or is it free? How does it work? Do you get equity? How does it work, Pamela?
So first of all, I just want to comment that Alyssa came through our program after we were fully invested in Fund 1. I just want to make that clear. And what we've done so far is it's a sponsored program. So Mayo Clinic has sponsored about half of our 35 cohorts to date. You know, the USSBA has sponsored about 5 of them. So that's how people gain access to the program at this time. In the future, it might be a fee for service or equity-based offering. But we actually work with Mayo Clinic to collect data. We're going to publish some papers on this. So we're just still in the middle of, you know, kind of really fleshing out how we're going to put this out to the world.
Do your candidates typically run clinical trials and the like?
Many of them do, yes. Yeah.
I want to introduce you to our speaker from last week at Nyquist Data. She's, I mean, perhaps you as a nexus for it, it makes accessing data that you need from clinical trials, from anything FDA, recall data and the like, fingertip easy. You don't have to go to all the other sources. I think that might be valuable for someone in your position.
Yeah, thank you. I would love that.
Yeah, that's all I do around here, connect people. So I love when my family gets together on Friday mornings. Perhaps that's a good place for us to begin to wrap. What can a network of medical device professionals, both consultants and companies themselves, perhaps do for the women entrepreneurs on this call? What do we need to do to support you? Amy, what do you need these days?
You know, I think that connection and community, like what you're facilitating here, is really important. Not only for women, I think for men and women. Just authentic sharing and you know, consistency. So I think what you're doing is incredible.
Well, incredible is generous, but we're here every Friday, so you're welcome to come anytime.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, I know that more than anyone in my network, you have leveraged my connections. I guess it's just a matter of like, who haven't you met yet? What
We
other
haven't
things do you
engaged
need?
with. So from the 10X, so, you know, just been fabulous. Yeah, so I'm pulling together everyone that I can and to fill the roles that I know that I need. And just hearing Pam talk about these women founders, that was all really new to me. And I do think that, you know, obviously, Joe, having your community has been incredibly empowering to me. And I'm hoping that I can, you know, pay back in some way sometime soon to all the different people that I've come in touch with. But Pam, hearing about the 2% and down to 1% is just stunning. And I had an experience last Friday when I went out to get my second purchase order on my product, because I've been told I need to have purchase orders to then get this funding. So I'm doing that. And then I ended up meeting with a potential investor and going for the ask. And you know, 5 years ago, I wouldn't have done that. And I did it. So I was really proud of myself. And part of this for me, Joe, and for everyone else who's much younger than I am on this in this community, I was sort of asleep for 25 years. So I didn't quite understand the male-female part of life. I mean, that whole, what do you mean? Because I'm a woman X.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had to learn that.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me, next week's call is with a woman entrepreneur who's part of our network. Sue Carr is working on a device she's winning awards, she's winning grants. So if you're available, you may be able to contribute or help as part of her network. I wouldn't be surprised if there might even be a capital opportunity for you if that were interesting. And 2 weeks ago, Dwayne presented before your next capital round, know this. So that might be a worthwhile recording. It's in the archives. I can get that to you, Pamela. And once again, both of you are welcome to come any week you like. You'll get reminders and come to the ones that are relevant for you, or just to hang out with us on Friday mornings.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Would anyone like to add anything before we close for today?
Just thank you for having the conversation, Joe and Alyssa and everyone. This is really wonderful.
I would love to, maybe let's talk afterward, Pamela, and maybe I can help socialize perhaps a graphic or a slide that speaks directly to women entrepreneurs in healthcare and medical devices, and maybe perhaps make them aware of what you're doing and how they can leverage that.
That would be terrific. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for today, and I'll see you next week with Sue Carr, who's going to talk about the filter removal of glass and how she's going to help industry that way. Thanks everyone. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. Bye-bye.